Just a peek, he hissed, low enough so the suits at the counter wouldn't hear. Like I hadn't already seen the wallet, heavy with someone else's cash. I'd said no. Returned it. Stupid, right? Should have kept my mouth shut. Now some high-heeled ice queen is here, asking questions, while I'm stuck wiping tables. But here's the kicker. They think I'm just a waitress. They have no clue Mama taught me things more valuable than money. And they really have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Just you wait. Maya didn't just resist temptation. She slammed the door on it, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She couldn't have known that her simple, honest act was about to make the sky itself open up with the thundering sound of a helicopter changing her life forever. Stick around to find out what happened next. The relentless, rhythmic squeak of the ceiling fan in O'Malley's diner was the soundtrack to Mia's life. It was a tired, greasy sound, much like the aroma of stale coffee and fried onions that clung to her uniform, even after she'd clocked out. At 26, Maya felt a weariness that settled deep in her bones, a constant companion to the knowing anxiety of overdue bills and the ever-present fear of what tomorrow might bring, or rather, what it might take away. Her tiny apartment, a shoebox crammed into a rundown building in a less than glamorous part of Queens, was a testament to her struggles. The chipped paint on the walls seemed to weep with the humidity. The faucet in the kitchen sink maintained a persistent drip, drip, drip that echoed the leaking away of her meager savings, and the eviction notice tucked under a magnet on the fridge was a stark daily reminder of her precarious situation. Her mother's medical bills, a towering mountain of debt left behind after a battle bravely fought but ultimately lost, were Maria's to bear. She worked double shifts whenever she could, her social life a distant memory, her dreams packed away in a dusty box labeled someday. Hummel's was a relic of a bygone era, nestled incongruously amidst the towering, indifferent skyscrapers of New York City's garment district. Its patrons were a mix of hurried office workers, grabbing a quick lunch-weary garment factory employees, and the occasional lost tourist. Maya knew their orders by heart, their quirks, their fleeting smiles, and their equally fleeting tips. She navigated the cramped aisles with an ingrained efficiency, balancing plates, pouring coffee, and offering a tired but genuine smile. This particular Tuesday had been brutal. A relentless downpour had started just before the lunch rush, turning the city into a symphony of honking taxis and frustrated sighs. The diner was packed, the floor slick with tracked-in rainwater, and the air thick with the smell of damp wool and frying food. Maya was run off her feet, her apron stained with coffee, her hair escaping its tight bun in frizzy tendrils around her temples. Old Missa Henderson in booth 4 had complained his soup was cold. Mrs. Rodriguez had insisted her toast was burnt, and a group of boisterous construction workers had left her a tip that barely covered the cost of their endless coffee refills. As the lunch rush finally began to ebb, leaving behind a wake of dirty tables and crumpled napkins, Maya allowed herself a small, weary sigh. She leaned against the counter for a moment, her arches screaming in protest, and surveyed the diner. Only a few stragglers remained. One was a man she hadn't seen before, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place in the humble surroundings of O'Malley's. He'd been quiet, nursing a single black coffee for the better part of an hour, engrossed in his phone. He'd paid in cash, a crisp $100 bill for a $3 coffee, telling her to keep the change with a distracted wave of his hand before striding out into the persistent drizzle. Such an extravagant tip was unusual, a small beacon in an otherwise dreary day. But Maya had learned not to question good fortune, however small. It was nearly 3:00 p.m., the lull before the sad trickle of early dinner patrons. She was clearing his table, wiping away the ring his coffee cup had left, when her hand brushed against something tucked down the side of the worn vinyl seat. It was smooth, cool, and unmistakably leather. Her breath hitched. Slowly, she reached down and pulled it free. It was a men's wallet, not just any wallet. This was different. It was a deep, rich obsidian black, the leather supple, and exuding an aura of understated luxury. There were no flashy logos, no ostentatious gold clasps, but the quality was palpable. She recognized the subtle, intricate woven pattern. It was a Bottega Veneta, a brand she'd only ever seen in the glossy pages of magazines. Her wealthier customers sometimes left behind. Even empty, it would be worth more than she earned in a week. And this wallet was not empty. It was thick, substantial, heavy. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She glanced around. The diner was almost deserted. The cook, was in the back, likely engrossed in his racing forms. Maria, the other waitress on duty, was on her break. Maya was alone. The weight of the wallet in her hand felt like the weight of the world, or at least all her worldly problems. The eviction notice, the red ink warnings on the final demands for her mother's hospital bills, the constant grinding worry that kept her awake at night. Everything could be eased, perhaps even solved by what this wallet likely contained. Her fingers trembled as she held it. It was a simple thing, really, just a piece of folded leather, but it represented a crossroads, a profound, terrifying choice. Who was he? The man in the suit. He tipped her $97 on a $3 coffee. He wouldn't miss a few hundred, would he? Maybe 1,000. The thought, insidious and tempting, slithered into her mind. She could pay the rent, get the wolves away from the door for another month. She could finally breathe. Her gaze darted to the security camera mounted above the counter, its single unblinking eye a silent sentinel. It was an old model, probably grainy, possibly not even recording properly. Was notoriously cheap. The temptation was a living thing coiling in her stomach, whispering poisonous suggestions. Just one look. Just see how much. No one will know. She thought of her mother, her gentle, honest mother who had worked her fingers to the bone as a seamstress, who had taught Mia the value of integrity, the importance of holding your head high even when life tried to beat you down. Dignity, Maya, she used to say, her voice soft but firm. It's the one thing they can't take from you unless you give it away. The memory was a splash of cold water. With a resolve that surprised even herself, Maya tightened her grip on the wallet. Not to open it, but to keep it firmly shut. Her jaw clenched. No, she wouldn't. She couldn't. It wasn't who she was. It wasn't how her mother had raised her. The problems were hers. Yes, the debts were hers, but so was her conscience. And that she realized with a sudden, stark clarity was not for sale, not for any price. Without a second thought, without allowing herself to waver, she strode towards the diner's grimy payphone near the restrooms. She wouldn't even look for a name and ID. He'd been in recently. He couldn't have gone far. The diner had his bill. Maybe it had a card payment slip with a name, even though he'd paid cash for the coffee. Or perhaps he would call. Or even better, perhaps he was already on his way back, panic dawning. She wouldn't look inside. She wouldn't compromise the one thing she had left that felt truly hers, her unwavering honesty. The decision made a strange sense of calm. Almost lightness settled over her, pushing back the earlier weariness. The wallet, still heavy in her hand, suddenly felt less like a burden and more like a testament. The decision not to look inside the wallet was a line drawn in the sand of Mir's conscience. It wasn't a hesitant, wavering line, but one carved with a sudden, unexpected fierceness. The momentary calm it brought, however, was quickly replaced by a new kind of anxiety. The urgent need to return the wallet to its owner, intact and untainted by her curiosity. She bypassed the payphone for a moment, thinking, what if he didn't call? What if he didn't realize where he'd lost it? The garment district was a sprawling, chaotic place. He could have been heading anywhere. Her first instinct was to check the bill from his coffee. He'd paid with a $100 bill, so it was a cash transaction, no credit card slip with a name. She remembered grumbling about having to break such a large note for a small coffee so early in the day. He hadn't been a regular. She would have remembered someone so conspicuously affluent. The wallet itself. She turned it over in her hands, the soft, intricately woven leather, a stark contrast to her own calloused fingers. It felt alien, a relic from a world so far removed from her own that it might as well have been from another planet. There was no external monogram, no identifying mark she could see without opening it. And opening it was the one thing she wouldn't do. She approached who was now hunched over the stainless steel counter in the kitchen, meticulously marking his racing form with a stubby pencil. Wisps of steam rose from a nearby pot carrying the scent of simmering chili for the dinner crowd. Sala began, her voice a little breathless. That man who was at table 7 earlier, the one in the expensive suit who paid with 100 for a coffee. S grunted without looking up. Yeah, what about him? Finally decided to complain about the coffee being too cheap. His attempt at humor was as flat as the day-old soda in the fountain machine. He left this. Maya held up the wallet, keeping a firm grip on it. S's eyes, magnified by his thick-rimmed glasses, finally lifted from his form. They widened slightly as they took in the wallet. He let out a low whistle. Whoa, looks like real dough. Fancy. You look inside, Naya said, perhaps a little too sharply. I haven't, and I'm not going to. Do you remember anything about him? Did he say where he was going? Anything? S scratched his bald head with the end of his pencil. Nah. Quiet type. Just drank his coffee. Stared at his phone like it was the Holy Grail. Rich folks, eh? Always glued to their gadgets. Didn't say a word except keep the change. He squinted at the wallet again. You sure you don't want to take a little peek? Find an ID or you know? He winked, a gesture that made Maya's skin crawl. No, S. I just want to return it. Her disappointment was a bitter pill. S wasn't going to be any help. His moral compass, she knew, was as flexible as a well-oiled hinge. Suit yourself. S shrugged, already turning back to his beloved horses. Don't come crying to me if you miss out on a finder's fee or a lifetime supply of whatever rich guys eat. Maya bit back a retort. Arguing with S was like wrestling a pig in mud. You both got dirty and the pig enjoyed it. She returned to the front of the diner, her gaze sweeping the rainy street outside. The downpour had eased slightly, but the sky was still a bruised purple. People hurried past, heads bowed under umbrellas, faces anonymous and indifferent. Her mystery man could be any one of them or miles away by now. The wallet felt like a hot coal in her hand. The longer she held it, the more opportunities for her resolve to waver for doubt to creep in. She needed to act, and quickly. She decided to give it an hour. She'd keep an eye on the door, pray he'd walk back in his face, etched with relief. If he didn't appear by 4 she'd have to reconsider the police. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Each chime of the old wall clock above the pie display seemed to mock her. The diner remained quiet. A couple of regulars came in for coffee and pie, their conversations. A low drone that barely registered with Maya. She refilled their cups, her eyes constantly flicking to the entrance, her ears straining for the sound of the door opening, with a sense of urgency. The wallet sat on the counter beside the cash register, hidden from view of the customers by a stack of menus. She couldn't bring herself to put it in her pocket. It felt safer there, yet more exposed. At 3:45 p.m., the phone rang. It was a jangling, old-fashioned sound that made Ma jump. S usually answered it from the kitchen extension. Allie's soul barked into the receiver. Maya busied herself wiping down an already clean section of the counter, trying to appear nonchalant, but her ears were pry-cricked. There was a pause, then S's voice, slightly more animated. Uh-huh. Yeah. Black fancy lady's wallet. A pause, no. A man's wallet. Real soft leather, kinda woven. Maya's heart leaped. This had to be him. Yeah, my waitress found it. Hang on. S covered the mouthpiece, his eyes finding Maya. Some guy lost his wallet. Sounds like your boy says it's a bega something or other. Is that what you said? Maya nodded eagerly. Yes, Bautka Veneta. That's it. Says he's sending someone to pick it up. A driver. Is that okay with you? Or you want to talk to him? Sending someone, not coming himself. A tiny sliver of disappointment wedged itself in Maya's chest, but she pushed it away. The important thing was that it was being returned. No, that's fine, Maya said, as long as it gets back to him. Did he give a name? S relayed the question. He says the driver will know what to do. Name's Mr. Sterling. Driver's on his way. Be here in 20. Mr. Sterling. The name sounded solid, dependable, like old money. Okay, Mia said, relief washing over her in a warm wave. Okay, good. The next 20 minutes crawled by. Mia found herself repeatedly smoothing her apron, tucking stray hairs behind her ears. She wanted to look presentable, not for Mr. Sterling, who apparently couldn't be bothered to retrieve his own incredibly valuable wallet, but for herself. It was a matter of pride. She imagined the driver, probably another man, in a suit, stern-faced, driving a sleek black car. He'd be polite, perfunctory, perhaps offer her a small reward, which she would politely decline. The main thing was the wallet would be gone from her possession, its silent temptation removed. At precisely 4:05 p.m., the door of Alal's opened. But it wasn't a stern-faced driver in a suit who entered. It was a young woman, probably not much older than Maya herself, dressed in sharply creased trousers and a silk blouse, carrying an expensive-looking leather briefcase. She had an air of brisk efficiency, her eyes scanning the diner before landing on Mir behind the counter. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice cool and professional. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Sterling. I believe someone found his wallet." Maya's carefully constructed scenario of the stern driver dissolved. "Yes, that was me," Maya replied, stepping forward. She gestured to the wallet, still resting behind the menus. "I found it." I didn't look inside. The last words came out with a quiet emphasis. The woman's expression didn't change, but her eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed to assess Maya thoroughly. "Sterling is very grateful. He asked me to retrieve it for him. May I?" Maya nodded, sliding the wallet across the counter. The woman picked it up. For a fleeting second, Maya half expected her to open it to check the contents, but she didn't. She simply held it for a moment, then gave Maya a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you," the woman said. "Mr. Sterling also asked me to give you this as a token of his appreciation." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a crisp white envelope. It was thick. Maya's stomach did a little flip. Here it was. The reward. The test. "Oh no. I couldn't," Maya said instinctively, holding up her hands. "Really? I just wanted to make sure he got it back. That's all." The woman's perfectly sculpted eyebrow rose a fraction. "Mr. Sterling insists. He understands it was an inconvenience, and he values honesty." "It wasn't an inconvenience," Maya said, her voice a little shaky. "And well, it's just the right thing to do." She looked at the envelope, then back at the woman. The thought of what that envelope might contain, weared with the pride that had kept her from opening the wallet, accepting a large sum of money, now felt like it diminished her earlier act, like it put a price tag on her integrity. "Please," the woman said, her tone softening slightly but still firm. He would be displeased if his gratitude was refused. Displeased. The word hung in the air. Maya didn't want to displease a man who owned a wallet like that, a man who sent personal assistance to retrieve lost items. Reluctantly, she reached out and took the envelope. It felt heavy, just like the wallet had. "Thank you," Maya murmured, feeling awkward and flustered. "Have a good day," the woman said, then turned and walked out of the diner as efficiently as she had entered the door, closing softly behind her. Maya stood there, the envelope clutched in her hand. The whole exchange had taken less than 5 minutes. It was over. The wallet was gone on its way back to Mr. Sterling. She stared at the envelope. Her shift was ending in less than an hour. Should she open it now? Here in front of S, who was undoubtedly watching her with avid curiosity from the kitchen pass-through? No, she would wait until she got home. Whatever was inside, it was private. The weight of the envelope was a new kind of burden, a different kind of temptation. The remaining hour of Mia's shift passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. The envelope, tucked securely into the inner pocket of her worn handbag, felt like a physical presence, a constant reminder of the strange turn her day had taken. One moment she felt a flicker of excitement. What if it was enough to make a real dent in her debts? The next, a wave of unease was accepting it, a betrayal of her own principles. She had returned the wallet without expectation of reward. So why did this envelope feel so complicated to form, couldn't contain his curiosity? "So aren't you going to open it?" he called from the kitchen, his voice laced with an almost childlike eagerness. "Might be a winning lottery ticket in there, or a map to a gold mine." Maya forced a weak smile. "Later, S. When I get home, playing it cool, eh?" "I get it." He winked again, that same annoying wink. "But if it's a lifetime supply of caviar, you owe me a taste." She managed a non-committal nod and focused on her end of shift tasks, wiping down tables with a vengeance. refilling salt and pepper shakers, and totting her meager tips for the day, which even with Mr. Sterling's earlier 90 sterlers were depressing. The envelope in her bag pulsed with a silent promise, or perhaps a silent challenge. The rain had finally stopped by the time Mia clocked out, leaving the city streets glistening under the watery late afternoon sun. The air was fresh and clean, a welcome change from the diner's greasy atmosphere. As she walked toward the subway station, the usual cacophony of New York, the blaring horns, the distant sirens, the rumble of unseen trains beneath her feet, seemed somehow muted, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Her tiny apartment felt even smaller and more oppressive than usual when she finally arrived home. The eviction notice on the fridge seemed to mock her with its stark black print. She tossed her keys onto the small wobbly table by the door, her handbag landing with a soft thud beside them. The envelope. For a long moment, she just stared at the bag. Part of her wanted to leave it there, unopened, a symbol of her unblemished integrity. But that was foolish, Mr. Bald, Sterling had insisted. His assistant had implied he'd be displeased if she refused. This wasn't about her wanting a reward. It was about him expressing gratitude. There was a difference, wasn't there? With trembling fingers, she pulled the envelope from her bag. It was made of thick, creamy paper, expensive to the touch. There was no name, no return address, just a plain white rectangle, deceptively simple. She sat down on her lumpy sofa, the springs groaning in protest. Taking a deep breath, she carefully tore open the flap. Inside, there wasn't a letter. There wasn't a check. There was cash, a thick stack of $100 bills. Maya's eyes widened. She slowly, carefully pulled the money out. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely hold it. She fanned the bills. 1, 2, 3, 10, 20. She counted them twice, then a third time, her heart pounding in her ears so loudly she thought it might deafen her. There were $50 bills, $5,000, $5,000. The sum was staggering. It was more money than she had seen in one place in her entire life. It was enough to pay off the most pressing of her mother's medical bills. It was enough to cover her rent for months, to silence the mocking eviction notice. It was a lifeline, a breath of air, when she felt like she was drowning. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and unexpected. They weren't tears of joy, not entirely. They were tears of relief, certainly, but also tears of confusion, of a strange, unnameable sorrow. This money, this incredible life-altering sum, had come from a moment of simple honesty, an act that should have been unremarkable, an act that her mother had taught her was just normal. Why did it feel so monumental? Why did it feel like she hadn't earned it even as she desperately needed it? She spread the bills out on her threadbare coffee table, the face of Benjamin Franklin staring up at her 50 times over. It looked like a fortune. It was a fortune to her. A wave of guilt washed over her. Had Mr. Sterling known how much she needed this? Had her poverty been that obvious? Had he pied her? The thought stung. She hadn't wanted pity. She had only wanted to do the right thing. But then another thought surfaced. He hadn't come himself. He'd sent an assistant. He'd probably dictated a sum to her, something generous enough to assuage any lingering guilt he might have felt for his carelessness, or to ensure the silence and gratitude of the finder. To a man who owned a Boutga Veneta wallet and tipped nearly $100 for a coffee, $5,000 was probably a trivial amount, the equivalent of what she might spend on a week's groceries. Yet trivial or not, it was here in her apartment on her table. She picked up one of the bills, the paper crisp and new between her fingers. This could change things. Not everything, not magically, but it could give her breathing room. It could lift a fraction of the crushing weight from her shoulders. For a long time, she simply sat there staring at the money. The initial shock began to fade, replaced by a cautious, hesitant sense. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was a turning point. But as the evening wore on, a new unsettling feeling began to creep in. It started as a faint prickle of unease, a sense of being watched. She found herself glancing at her window, even though it faced a brick wall. The usual city noises outside, the distant sirens, the rumble of the subway, the occasional shout from the street below, seemed to take on a more ominous tone. Was it just her imagination? The sudden influx of so much money, the strangeness of the day, was it making her paranoid? She carefully gathered the bills, her hands still not entirely steady, and looked for a place to hide them under her mattress. Felt too cliché, too vulnerable in a shoebox in her closet. In a tea caddy, her apartment, usually a sanctuary of familiar shabes, suddenly felt insecure, its flimsy door and cheap lock inadequate. She finally settled on an old empty coffee tin tucked away at the back of her kitchen cupboard behind a row of dusty spice jars. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best she could do for now. Sleep did not come easily that night. Her mind raced, replaying the day's events over and over. The man in the suit, the luxurious wallet, her decision not to look, the cool, efficient assistant, the envelope heavy with cash, and now this strange, lingering sense of unease. She kept thinking about Mr. Sterling. Who was he? Why was he so generous? And why hadn't he come himself? There was a piece of the puzzle missing, a sense that the story wasn't quite over. She told herself she was being ridiculous. He was just a rich man who'd lost his wallet and was grateful to have it returned. The money was a thank you, nothing more. Tomorrow she would go to the bank, deposit the cash, or most of it, keeping some to pay the landlord in person, and begin the practical, sensible process of chipping away at her debts. Life would go back to normal, or at least a slightly less stressful version of normal. But as she drifted in and out of a restless sleep, images flickered behind her eyelids. The intricate weave of the Bega Veneta leather, the cool gaze of the assistant, and a new unbidden image. A helicopter, its blades slicing through a dark sky, coming closer and closer. She dismissed it as a stress-induced dream, a product of an overactive imagination fueled by an extraordinary day. She couldn't have known how prescient that fleeting image would prove to be. The whispers of change were just beginning, and they were about to become a roar. The morning after finding the wallet, Maya awoke with a jolt, the dream of the helicopter still vivid in her mind. She lay still for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of her apartment building coming to life. The creak of floorboards overhead, the distant flush of a toilet, the muffled sounds of traffic from the street below. For a split second, everything felt normal. And then the memory of the previous day of the wallet, the assistant, and the $5,000 hidden in the coffee tin rushed back in. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie rather than her own life. Her first act was to check the coffee tin. The money was still there, a solid, undeniable presence. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of anxiety mixed with a potent dose of relief through her. This was real. She had the day off from O'Mal's, a small mercy. Her original plan for the day had been to visit a temp agency to see if she could pick up some office work on her days off from the diner. Anything to supplement her meager income. Now with Mr. Sterling's money, the desperation wasn't as acute, but the habit of worry was hard to break. She decided to stick to her plan, at least in part. She would go to the bank first, deposit the majority of the cash. Carrying that much money around made her incredibly nervous. Then she would pay her overdue rent. The relief of handing over that cash to her grumpy landlord, Mr. Henderson, no relation to the diner patron, though equally commence Henderson would be immense. The trip to the bank was nerve-wracking. She clutched her handbag tightly, imagining pickpockets at every corner, her eyes darting suspiciously at anyone who seemed to linger too close. The bank teller, a young woman with bored eyes, barely blinked when Maya pushed a thick stack of $100 bills under the partition, asking to deposit 4,000 of it into her nearly empty savings account. To the teller, it was just another transaction. To Maya, it felt like a monumental step, walking out of the bank. $4,000 lighter in her purse, but infinitely richer in her savings account. Maya felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The remaining $1,000 earmarked for rent and some immediate necessities still felt like a fortune. Her landlord, Mr. Henderson, a portly man whose default expression was a scowl, was genuinely surprised when Mia handed him 6 months' worth of rent in cash. His eyes, small and buried in fleshy folds, widened almost comically. "Well, I'll be," he'd muttered, counting the bills slowly, suspiciously, before his scowl softened into something resembling grudging respect. "Thought I'd be seeing you in housing court." Girly. "Just came into a little bit of luck, Mr. Henderson." Mir had said, offering a small polite smile. The eviction notice on her fridge was ceremoniously torn up and tossed into the bin that evening. It was a small act, but it felt like a significant victory. For the next few days, Maya tried to settle back into her routine. She went to work at her mails, served coffee and pie, dealt with S's grumbling and the usual array of customer quirks. She told no one at the diner about the extent of Mr. Sterling's generosity, deflecting S's nosy questions with vague answers about a decent reward. She didn't want the attention or the inevitable speculation. But things weren't quite the same. The constant grinding fear about money had eased, replaced by a different kind of awareness. She noticed things she hadn't before, or perhaps hadn't allowed herself to notice. The subtle hierarchies among the diner's patrons, the way some people dismissed her with a wave of a hand, the casual arrogance of wealth, even in its more modest forms. And then there was the lingering unease, that faint, persistent feeling of being observed. It was nothing concrete, just little things. A dark sedan parked across the street from Elise for 2 days in a row, too sleek and out of place for the neighborhood. Sometimes when she walked home, she'd get the distinct feeling that someone was a block or two behind her, their footsteps echoing hers a little too closely. She'd whirl around her heart, pounding only to see a busy street, ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. No one seemed to be paying her any particular attention. Was she becoming paranoid? Was the sudden influx of money making her jump at shadows? Or was it something more? She also noticed a subtle shift in how some people treated her, even though they couldn't possibly know about the $5,000. It was almost as if the act of honesty, or perhaps the encounter with clear wealth, had left an invisible mark on her. Or maybe it was her own demeanor that had changed with some of the financial pressure lifted. Perhaps she carried herself differently, a little straighter, a little more confidently. One afternoon, a week after finding the wallet, a woman came into Amala's. She was elegant, dressed in expensive but understated clothes, and she sat at one of Mia's tables, ordering only a black tea. She looked vaguely familiar. Mia frowned, trying to place her. The woman offered a polite, almost knowing smile. "Everything all right, dear?" the woman asked, her voice cultured and smooth. "Yes, ma'am, thank you," Maya replied, still puzzled. "Can I get you anything else?" "No, this is perfect." The woman took a sip of her tea, her eyes a striking shade of hazel, studying Maya over the rim of the cup. "You know, it's rare to find genuine integrity these days. It's refreshing." Maya froze. Was this woman connected to Mr. Sterling? Her heart began to beat faster. I don't know what you mean," she stammered. The woman smiled again, a little wider this time. "I think you do. Keep up the good work." She placed a $5 bill on the table for her $2 tea, then stood up and walked out, leaving Maya staring after her, bewildered and a little unnerved. Who was she? Had Mr. Sterling sent her? Was he checking up on her? The thought was unsettling. The sedan, the feeling of being followed, this cryptic woman. It was all starting to feel less like paranoia and more like something deliberate. But why? He'd gotten his wallet back. He'd thanked her generously. What more could there be? Orchids. Expensive orchids. Who would leave these for her? And how did they know her exact apartment number? Mr. Sterling's assistant hadn't come up to her apartment. She'd met Mara at the diner. The pieces were clicking into place with a disturbing resonance. Mr. Sterling, or someone connected to him, was not just idly grateful. They were actively, if subtly, making their presence known. The generosity was one thing. This quiet, persistent attention was another entirely. It felt less like gratitude and more like observation, or perhaps even a test of some kind. The $5,000, which had initially felt like a godsend, now seemed to carry invisible strings. Maya felt a growing dissonance, a sense that her simple life had been irrevocably nudged off its axis, sent spinning into an orbit she didn't understand and hadn't asked for. The dream of the helicopter returned that night, louder this time, more insistent. The thumping of its blades seemed to vibrate through her cheap mattress, shaking her awake in a cold sweat. She sat bolt upright in bed, her heart racing, convinced for a terrifying moment that the sound was real, that a helicopter was actually hovering outside her window in the pre-dawn darkness of Queens. She rushed to the window, pulling aside the thin curtain, her breath catching in her throat. The sky was empty, save for the faint orange glow of the city lights reflecting off the low clouds. There was no helicopter, just the familiar gritty view of the brick wall opposite. The following days were a strange mix of routine and apprehension for Maya. She went to work, smiled at customers, and tried to ignore the knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in her stomach. The orchids sat on her small kitchen table, their exotic beauty a stark, constant reminder of the inexplicable turn her life had taken. They were starting to wilt slightly, and Maya found herself irrationally saddened by their slow decay, as if it mirrored the fading of her own simple, predictable existence. She tried to rationalize the strange occurrences. The sedan could have belonged to anyone. The feeling of being followed was likely her overactive imagination, fueled by stress and lack of sleep. The woman in the diner who spoke of integrity, a coincidence surely, and the flowers. Perhaps a misguided admirer from the neighborhood, though she couldn't imagine who. Around 2:30 p.m., a low rhythmic thumping sound began to intrude upon the usual diner noises of clattering plates and sizzling burgers. At first it was faint, barely perceptible, like a distant heartbeat. Maya paused a coffee pot in her hand and tilted her head, listening. S, from his station at the grill, also looked up, a puzzled expression on his face. "What incarnation is that?" he muttered, wiping grease from his hands onto his already stained apron. The thumping grew louder, more insistent, vibrating through the floorboards, rattling the glasses on the shelves. It was a deep, resonant whirring, a sound utterly alien to the narrow canyon-like streets of the garment district. Customers started to murmur, looking up from their meals, their faces a mixture of curiosity and alarm. "Sounds like a helicopter," one man said, peering out the diner's front window. Maya's blood ran cold. The dream. The sound was identical to the one that had haunted her sleep. She rushed to the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. Other patrons were already crowding there, necks craned, looking upwards. The sky above the slit of visible space between the tall buildings was a clear, bright blue. But the sound was definitely getting closer, louder, and it was undeniably the rhythmic whump-whump of helicopter blades. "It's getting really close." Someone else breathed, their voice tinged with awe and a little fear. "What's a chopper doing flying so low around here?" The noise became deafening, shaking the very foundations of the old diner. Plates vibrated on the tables. The windows rattled in their frames, and the old ceiling fan seemed to wobble precariously. Dust motes dislodged from decades of undisturbed rest in the rafters danced in the shafts of sunlight slanting through the windows. Then through the front window they saw it, a sleek black helicopter, its powerful rotors beating the air into submission, was descending, not towards a distant helipad, not passing overhead, but coming down seemingly right into the street outside O'Malley's diner. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Traffic on the normally bustling street had come to a standstill. Pedestrians were frozen, staring upwards, their faces upturned in disbelief. It's landing," Is gasped, his usual gruffness replaced by sheer astonishment. In the middle of 37th Street is the pilot nuts. The helicopter impossibly expertly settled onto the asphalt with a final powerful gust of wind that flattened hats and sent loose papers skittering down the street like frightened mice. Its engines began to wind down the roar of the rotors, slowly diminishing to a more manageable throb. It was an impressive machine, gleaming and powerful looking, utterly incongruous, parked between a row of yellow cabs and a delivery truck. The side of the helicopter bore a discreet, elegant logo, a stylized S intertwined with a wing. Silence, thick and stunned, descended inside Elise. Everyone, Maya included, was simply staring, dumbfounded. Then a door on the side of the helicopter slid open, and a set of steps extended smoothly to the ground. A figure emerged, silhouetted for a moment against the bright sunlight. As he stepped onto the pavement and walked toward the diner, his features became clear. It was the man from 2 weeks ago, the man whose wallet Mara had found, Mr. Sterling. He was just as impeccably dressed as before, in a dark, perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed. He moved with an air of quiet authority, his gaze fixed on the entrance of O'Malley's. He seemed utterly unfazed by the commotion his arrival had caused, as if landing a helicopter in the middle of a busy Manhattan street was the most natural thing in the world for him. He stopped in front of the counter just a few feet away from Maya. Up close, she could see the fine lines etched around his eyes, a testament to age and perhaps countless hours of intense focus. His gaze was direct, unwavering, and surprisingly kind. "Miss Maya Thompson, I presume," he said, his voice calm and resonant, easily cutting through the lingering thrum of the helicopter outside. Ma could only nod her throat too tight for words. How did he know her full name? She'd never given it. The flowers, the woman in the diner, they really had been checking up on her. "I believe we haven't been properly introduced," Mr. Sterling continued, extending his hand. "I am Alexander Sterling, and I've come to thank you personally." Maya stared at his outstretched hand, then slowly, hesitantly reached out her own. Her hand, calloused and work-worn, was enveloped by his smooth, firm grip. It felt like a handshake across an impossible divide. You landed a helicopter in the street." She finally managed to stammer the absurdity of the situation, momentarily overriding her shock. Alexander Sterling's smile widened slightly. "I find it's often the most efficient way to travel in this city, and I felt this particular thank you warranted a slightly more direct approach." He gestured vaguely toward the street outside, as if a helicopter was no more unusual than a taxi. The other patrons in the diner were utterly transfixed, their forgotten meals growing cold. S stood in the kitchen doorway, his jaw practically on the floor. Mr. Sterling, his assistant, interjected softly, stepping forward. "Perhaps we could," she gestured discreetly towards an empty booth. "Ah, yes, of course. Miss Hayes is always keen on discretion," Mr. Sterling said, a twinkle in his eye. "Miss Thompson, would you perhaps have a few moments to spare? There's something I'd like to discuss with you, in private if possible." Maya looked around at the sea of curious faces, then back at Alexander Sterling. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, disbelief, and a dawning incredible sense that her life, as she knew it, was about to be irrevocably altered. The dream of the helicopter hadn't been a dream at all. It had been a prophecy, and it had just landed on her doorstep, or rather right outside her workplace. She took a deep breath, her gaze meeting Mr. Sterling's. "Yes," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but firm. "Yes, I have time." The sky had thundered, and an astonishing arrival had breached the mundane reality of her world. Whatever came next, Maya knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Alexander Sterling, with a polite nod to the stunned onlookers, gestured toward the quietest booth in the corner of O'Mal's, the one usually reserved for couples, seeking a modicum of privacy. Mia, feeling as if she were moving in a dream, untied her apron and laid it on the counter, her hands trembling slightly. S simply stared speechless as she walked past him. Miss Hayes, the ever-efficient assistant, was already seated in the booth, her portfolio open on the table. Ma slid onto the worn vinyl seat opposite Mr. Sterling. The man exuded an aura of calm power that was both intimidating and strangely reassuring. "Please don't be alarmed, Miss Thompson," Mr. Sterling began, his voice low and soothing. "I realize my arrival was somewhat unconventional." He glanced out the window at his helicopter, which was now attracting a considerable crowd, and the flashing lights of an approaching police car, though several well-dressed men in dark suits seemed to be calmly managing the situation outside. "But I assure you, my intentions are entirely benign." Maya swallowed hard. The $5,000, it was incredibly generous, Mr. Sterling. More than enough. "I don't understand why." "The $5,000 was a simple gratuity." "Miss Thompson," he interrupted gently, "a token for the return of my property. What I'm here to discuss is something more significant." He paused, his blue eyes studying her intently. "My wallet, as you correctly surmised, is indeed about Bottega Veneta, but its monetary value is secondary. What you may not have realized is what it contained, or rather what it didn't contain when it was returned to me." Maya frowned. "Didn't contain, I didn't look inside, sir. I told your assistant." "Precisely," Mr. Sterling said, a note of deep satisfaction in his voice. "And that Miss Thompson is why I am here. That wallet contained a significant amount of cash. Yes, it also contained several credit cards of an unlimited nature. More importantly, however, it contained a small, unassuming data chip, no bigger than your fingernail, tucked into a hidden compartment. Mir's eyes widened. A data chip. This chip, mister? Sterling continued his voice, dropping slightly contained highly sensitive information. Proprietary algorithms for a new clean energy project my company is developing. Information that in the wrong hands could be worth, well, let's just say far more than the cash in the wallet. Information that certain less scrupulous competitors would pay a king's ransom to acquire. A cold dread trickled down Mir's spine. She hadn't just found a rich man's wallet. She'd stumbled into something far more complex, something that sounded like corporate espionage. When Miss Hayes informed me that the wallet had been found by a waitress who explicitly stated she hadn't looked inside, I was intrigued. When she further informed me that you refused a reward initially, I was impressed. We of course verified that the chip was still present and untampered with immediately upon its return. It was. He leaned forward slightly. Miss Thompson, in my world, genuine, unshakable integrity is a rarer commodity than gold. Many people faced with the temptation that wallet presented, the cash, the cards, would have succumbed. Many more, had they any inkling of the data chip's value, might have been tempted to exploit it. You did neither. You didn't even look for a name. It was the right thing to do, Maya said softly, echoing her earlier sentiment. Though the words felt inadequate in the face of this revelation, it was an extraordinary thing to do in the circumstances. Mr. Sterling corrected, I had Miss Hayes discreetly make some inquiries about you. We learned about your financial struggles, your late mother's medical bills, your diligence at this diner. We learned about your character from people who know you, even if they don't know you well. The flowers, the woman who spoke to you. Small tests, perhaps, to see if the sudden windfall had changed you or if your honesty was a fluke. It was not. Maya felt a flush creep up her neck. So she had been watched, investigated. It was unsettling but also strangely validating. The world of high finance and big business can be a cutthroat place. Miss Thompson Sterling continued his expression. Serious. Trust is paramount. Yet it is often the hardest thing to find. I've built my enterprise Sterling Innovations on a foundation of cutting-edge technology and I hope ethical practice. But I'm always searching for people who embody that ethic, not just in word but in deed. Miss Hayes slid a thin, elegant brochure across the table towards Mir. The cover read, The Sterling Foundation, Investing in Potential, Rewarding Integrity. My company has a philanthropic arm. Mr. Sterling explained. The Sterling Foundation. We fund various initiatives, education, sustainable development, medical research. But we also have a special program, one very close to my heart. It's designed to identify individuals of exceptional character who, through no fault of their own, face significant obstacles. We offer them opportunities. Maya stared at the brochure, then back at Mr. Sterling, her mind struggling to process the implications. Opportunities? Yes, he affirmed. You see, Miss Thompson, your act of honesty didn't just save me from a potentially disastrous security breach. It showed me who you are, and I believe someone of your caliber. Your innate integrity and resilience deserves more than just waiting tables and struggling to make ends meet, however noble that work is. Maya was speechless. Her jaw had literally dropped. A full scholarship, a job at a company like his. It was beyond anything she could have ever dreamed. The eviction noticed the medical bills, the constant worry. The weight of it all seemed to lift, replaced by a dizzying sense of possibility. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated shock and a dawning, overwhelming gratitude. Mr. Sterling, I don't know what to say. I can't believe it. Believe it, Miss Thompson, he said, his smile genuine and warm. You earned it, not by finding my wallet, but by being the person you are. The wallet was merely the catalyst that brought you to my attention. A twist indeed. The wallet hadn't just been about money. It had been a test, an unintentional one at first, but a profound one nonetheless. And the helicopter, the grand gesture, wasn't just a flamboyant thank you. It was an announcement, an arrival, not just his, but hers too, into a new life, a new future. There is one small condition, if you can call it, that Mr. Sterling added, his tone gentle. Mia looked at him, her heart still soaring, but a flicker of apprehension returned. The data chip, he said, it contains the key to a project that could revolutionize renewable energy. It's taken years of research. Its security is paramount. The fact that it remains safe with you, unopened, unremarked upon, speaks volumes. We need more people like you, Maya. May I call you Maya? She nodded, still dazed. We need people who understand the value of discretion, of trust, of doing the right thing even when no one is watching, and even when the personal cost of doing so might seem high. This isn't just about a scholarship or a job, Ma. It's an invitation to be part of something that matters, something that could genuinely change the world for the better. And that, my friends, is how Maya's ordinary life took an extraordinary turn. All because she chose honesty over opportunity when faced with a billionaire's lost wallet. It wasn't just about returning the money. It was about her unwavering integrity, a quality that Alexander Sterling valued above all else. The helicopter landing wasn't just a grand gesture. It was the arrival of a new beginning for Maya, a future filled with promise, education, and the chance to make a real difference. What would you have done in May's situation? It's a tough question, right? Her story reminds us that sometimes the choices that seem smallest can have the biggest impact, and the true wealth lies not in what we have, but in who we are. If Maya's incredible journey resonated with you, if it made you think, or even just made your jaw drop a little, please give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to share it with your friends who love a story about fate, integrity, and unexpected helicopters. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on more inspiring and dramatic stories like this one. Thanks for watching.